All
All
right.
right. Spoke the same time. We are live on YouTube.
This is our first live video audio podcast.
Yep.
And I forgot to get my makeup artist. Oh,
There
well.
you go. Well,
Yeah.
you and me both. And I can't even get my audio to work right, so I've got to wear my headphones. So there we are.
Yeah, well, it's good to know it seems okay without the headphones because I look
For you, it does.
I look dorky with headphones on.
Yeah, well,
Anyway,
you do.
I
Yeah,
guess
what
we
are you
all
gonna-
do. Hey,
Yeah. Well, I mean, if any of you guys watching, if there's anybody out there watching and you have a question or comment during the podcast, go ahead and post it. We will get to it during the podcast at some point, I assume.
and actually, it would be nice to know, even if you don't have a comment, if there's anybody there, please, let us
Yeah,
know. Just
we
put a
can
comment.
certainly shout people out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So should we get going on the? Hold on. Let me
Well,
actually
yeah.
put my focus on Do Not Disturb. That would help. That way, my phone doesn't ring during the recording.
I already shut mine off, but I will put it on Do Not Disturb too.
Good.
And get rid of all these things. Yeah, it's like everything you have to remember. And now that we're live, it's even more important.
Exactly.
So forgive us while we get over these little growing pains here.
Oh, it's all fun. It's all fun.
And I suppose we should introduce ourselves, even though it says who we are. Well, at least I only have my first name, but
Yeah.
So I'm John Aaron, and happy to be here with you all.
Ooh.
Are you hearing that noise in the background?
I am hearing the noise, but that's all right. It's
Okay, so
good.
it's live, and we have a leaf blower outside.
There we go.
And that'll only be there for a while, and then there'll be a garbage truck, but experiments are worth all that. Somebody's actually watching.
Yes, thank you,
Nathaniel. And you may be the only one here, which is fine too. Yes, so I'm John Aaron. I teach a lot of meditation. I teach at New York Insight. I'm a co-guiding teacher of Space to Meditate. I teach mindfulness-based stress reduction, and I've been teaching for about almost 20 plus years. And I'm happy to be here with Doug, who we've known each other for at least 15 of those 20 years. So not quite the old married couple yet, but we could act that way.
That's right.
Yeah. Doug, you have to introduce yourself now.
Oh, do I? All right. Well, Doug Smith, Doug's Dharma on YouTube. Probably some of you may have seen it. If you haven't, it's a channel where I talk a lot about some ideas from early Buddhism and sort of a more scholarly, less actually useful approach than John's. So, it's the way we do
things. I don't know. It's not, jump to conclusions.
Yeah.
Well. So our topic today.
Well, should we start the literal recording, or in other words?
Yeah. Well, I guess
we should probably because we're gonna be putting this into a podcast format, as everyone knows. Do we want to start let's do the podcast beginning, and then I can cut this.
Got it. Okay.
How do you think?
That's fine. Yeah. So you start.
All right. Well, let's give a few seconds of dead air, and then I will start. How about that? All right. All right. Great to see you again, John. We are starting our podcast here in a new format. We did this last week a little bit, or last time we recorded, which was a couple weeks ago now.
Yeah, that's true. We did. We used this platform, and good to see you too. And I've decided to leave it's not, the heat wave hasn't hit here quite yet, so I have the windows open and the ceiling fan on, so we may get some interesting sounds occasionally, like a leaf blower, a garbage truck, or a police siren. But
it's
I can't help it. In New York. Yeah. Unlike you, who are up in the boonies.
The boonies, yeah.
So,
but we've had the heat wave here, so yeah, it's warm.
Yeah, and it'll get hot this afternoon. So greetings, folks. Really nice to be with you. And our topic today is, well, it's letting go, which is directly related to tanha and upadana, the
craving, clinging. Yep. Yeah.
second noble truth. And I'll just tell the story that, I mean, what came up for me and why I'm kind of, um, somebody from Germany, lovely. One of the things that came up for me, I told this story to Doug yesterday, and I'll kind of about letting go, because I don't know about you guys, but occasionally, like if you're with a group of people and you take your seat, and then suddenly that seat is your seat, right? Like even in, like, I've been on meditation retreats, where you go in and you make you get your cushion, you take your seat in the meditation hall, and then the next day you go out and somebody's sitting in your seat, and you act as though that seat was yours to begin with.
That's right.
So, so I was at an event on last week, and it was a fantastic New York event at a new venue, which is called Little Island, which was built by one of the major philanthropists in New York as a kind of gift to the city. And it's this man-made island out on the Hudson that takes place. It was built over. They ripped down one of the wharfs that was there and put this really cool structure in. And there's an amphitheater there, and now they have really fantastic shows in this amphitheater. And if it's a beautiful night, you're out there as the sun is setting, and then the show starts, and you're overlooking the Hudson. And of course, on the other side of the Hudson is New Jersey, but still, there is that. Not to underplay New Jersey, there are beautiful parts of New Jersey. And anyway, so it's not reserved seating, it's reserved section. And we were sitting in the third row, nice section. It was Twyla Tharp was the dance company, and live music. And there were two people in our row when we came in. There were two people on the end, two people in the middle, two people on the other end, and then there were three of us, and then there were spaces on either side of this middle couple. And so there were basically two seats left in our row, but they were separated by two people. And a couple came, and the usher brought them down to our row and asked very politely if the people who were sitting with a seat on each side of them would move. And one woman was fine moving, but the woman who was like dead center, or thought she was dead center, she refused to move. And
Per seat.
yes, right. And okay, the seats are only $25. It's kind of a community event. It's like, just there's something really special about being there. And it was a gazillion-dollar production, so $25 for what we were paying was bupkis. Anyway, finally she moved, but there was this like, what are you holding on to? It's not your seat, right? It wasn't like you bought that seat. And yes, okay, she got there early to get a good seat, but we were asking her to move like maybe 12 inches. And it wasn't like there were sightline issues. So it was that, like, it's like, wow, what else do we hold on to? And how do we cling to something as if it were mine, right? And of course, this is the second noble truth, is, clinging to something or pushing away something. And, we're holding on to things so strongly at times that it just inevitably creates some level of suffering, either for us or for others. And in this case, it was for both, right? This woman, like, no, she was not going to move. She enjoyed the show in the end. She did move, and we checked in, but it was like, she's not going to move because this is her seat. And then it created a little stir around us, and comments were coming, and so everybody was experiencing some level of suffering in that moment. And it was just this inability to let go of something. And so how do we confront that both in our formal meditation practice, of course, and in our daily lives? What are we holding on to? And of course, I mean, on the most existential level, right, we're holding on to our lives.
Yeah.
It's like we're holding on for dear life to our life.
Mhm.
And that's a natural inclination, of course, and not unhealthy necessarily, until it becomes unhealthy. And how do we know? And so it's really interesting when we put that in every context that we're in.
Yeah.
How are we holding on?
Yeah, and I was reflecting about, one of the aspects of holding on that I see in myself and I see in some people around me sometimes, is there's this fear of letting go, that things will spin out of control. That that it's only by holding on that we can control the world. And that the world is sort of a very small amount from just spinning out of control and ruining everything. And so what I need to do is to hang on for dear life to make sure things work out the way I want them to, because only I have the control, or at least that's the expectation,
The perception.
the perception. Yeah, exactly. And so there's this fear. There's this fear that arises when you hear, you know, let things go or let them be, another way to put it, the Beatles song.
Well, that's interesting because letting it. I was going to get into that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Letting it be is a little different than letting it
Yeah,
go,
yep,
right?
different. Yep, yep,
Letting it be is like almost it's a level of equanimity. It's like, okay, so this is the way it is. It's going to be
yep.
that way for now, and I can be with that.
Mhm.
Letting it go is like letting go of the idea of control.
Yeah.
Or not even the idea of letting go of control. Period.
Mhm.
And um, my teacher Matt used to say, "Live your life as though you're in complete control, knowing the whole time that you're not." Right? It's like, okay, so I actually have no control, but I can pretend that I have control. But if I hold on, if I think that pretending is actually real, then I start to suffer when things don't go the way I want them to go. Right? And so, um, and it can start, even when we are practicing when we're doing our formal meditation practice, if we go in with an expectation of what should happen in our meditation practice or what I want to happen, you know. And like when I start a new class, I request that people stop reading about meditation, because as soon as you read about meditation, very likely is there will be some report, somebody will say, oh yes, this experience happened. And then it's like, oh, I want that experience. And it's just an experience, right? And you have no control really over what's going to happen. And the first thing we learn, of course, when we sit and meditate is that we have no control over our thinking mind, you know, at least at first. We have control. We learn that we have control over, to some degree, over how we respond to that. But in terms of what the mind is producing moment to moment, that isn't something, the thinking mind, that isn't something we have any control over. And so what is it like to let go of that control?
Yeah. And even over our responses. I mean,
Sure.
we have some limited control over our responses, but, especially, well, I was going to say when you start out, but even years into it, I mean, you have a limited amount, but, sometimes your response just arises. And of course, there's layers and layers, because then your response may arise and then you have some limited control over how you may respond to your response, right? Do you accept the response or not? But sometimes it just bang, it's right in front of you, and it's hard to escape, because again, you're sort of caught up in it.
Right. And so what do you do, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
this is really at the crux of meditation practice. I mean, I'm in the middle of teaching a beginner class right now, which I haven't done for a while, which I love. And I had introduced walking meditation just a couple days ago, and somebody reported that, oh yes, so I was thinking, my thought was, my thinking mind was saying, am I doing this right? And then added to that was, I shouldn't be thinking about whether I'm doing this right. And then this whole chain of thought arose. And so what is our response to the thought that arises in that moment? Am I doing this right? And, eventually the thought becomes, oh, that's just a thought. Let it be. So that's where the let it be comes in. And as you let it be, the volume really drops down on that. So on one level, there is an automatic response or an automatic reaction, but then there can be a more volitional. There's an observation, and then the observation, in the observing of what's happening, we let go of the need to do anything more, in a sense. Um, or we, in the observing of what happens, we're reminded to come back to the breath or to the sensations of walking. Now you probably hear the garbage truck in the background. So, can we let go of
This
that?
is this audio is pretty good at
Good.
eliminating things, but yeah, as we say, we're experimenting with a new system, so who
Yeah.
knows what it's going to sound like?
Yeah.
We'll
Next
see.
week I'll close the windows and turn on the AC, and then we'll just have a minor hum in the background. But I kind of like
That's
the
right.
urban sound.
Yeah,
There's
yeah, yeah.
something. And the garbage sounds can be really. These garbage trucks can be very interesting audio.
And it's something to practice with, right? As you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can let it bother me, or I can let it go.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and so so then there's like the notion of letting go of, on the existential level, right? Letting go of uh, the idea of me, right? So we're letting go of an identity. We're letting go of the need to be anyone,
Hmm.
and that's a huge thing for people.
Yeah.
And yet there's something so liberating in that, that once people experience it, and this is the beauty of, say, retreat practice, right? Because on retreat practice, you don't have to be anyone. Um, when we go on a silent meditation retreat, it's really interesting. Sometimes I remember my very first silent meditation retreat at IMS. I'd never been on one before. And before we go into silence, we're just hanging out and sitting, having tea or whatever, or maybe having a meal. And everybody's talking about who they are, where they're from, who they studied with, what their last 10 retreats were, whatever it is. There's something that's happening in that moment. And then suddenly we go into silence, and that's it, right? There's no more of that. And that is so liberating, because it's not about that. It's not about who you study with, how many retreats you've been on, any of that, what your
Yeah.
professional life is, what your income is, whatever it is, that's all gone. And in that moment where you let that go, you realize, wow, I bring a lot into this which is completely unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, it's very scary for some people to give that up.
Oh,
Give
no
up and
question about it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've talked to
It
people
is.
who are just, it's the idea of it is something that's just, frightens them basically.
Yeah. Yeah. You want something to hold on to.
Yeah.
And yet, in the end, there's nothing to hold on to. So, in a sense, one level of looking at this is that we're always practicing for those final moments in this manifestation, right?
Mhm.
That final letting go of this body, right? And that's also rather, although as I pointed out on a retreat that I was leading a couple of weeks ago, it was like it's always that way. We just don't think about it, right? We never know when our last breath is going to be.
Mhm.
So if each exhale can be a practice of letting go, then we're sort of practicing being on that edge all the time.
Yeah.
And there's something, cool about that edge. Once you recognize how powerful the practice is, it's like, oh, yeah, I better be here now, to quote a famous book title, right? Because I don't know what the next moment is going to bring.
Right.
So if I let go of the idea that I'm going to be like here the next moment, wow, that really wakes us up.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
and then in terms of relational practice, it's just as powerful, right? Because if we're in close relationship with someone, and any of you who are listening, obviously, who have lost people suddenly, to heart attack or whatever, and uh, you recognize how uh, fragile life can be in that sense.
Mhm.
And it's like, if I had only known, right, that this person wasn't going to be here tomorrow, I would have been very different with them today.
Mhm.
Well, why aren't we like that all the time? It's like we
Yeah.
get into these habits, and then the habit is like hard to let go of. It's like, oh yes. And so our practice really comes down to this ultimate letting go, but
Mhm.
um, in the interim, we have so many opportunities to really work with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things I did a video a while ago, not that long ago, about how so much of Buddhist practice does seem to be a a coming to terms with death, a practice that is basically accepting of death and trying to understand it through various kinds of practices, including practices of meditation. I mean, we're talking about right now of letting go, letting be, are ways that we can approach death in that way, in that same sense of saying we can't take it with us, in a sense, that what's the point of clinging to an identity that is not going to be around. Um, in a lot of ways, this goes back really to the earliest teachings as well, and the many metaphors that are used in deep states of meditation, meditative absorption. One of the metaphors used for the fourth jhana, which is the deepest of these sort of the Buddha's favorite meditative absorptions, involves being covered with a white cloth.
Mm,
Um, and that always, to me, suggested, a corpse being, sort of wrapped in a white cloth, prepared for burial or something like that. This kind of deep equanimity that comes, or that could come, if with practice, with that kind of, and of course there are deeper states as well that are even closer, in many ways, to quote unquote death. I mean, the sense of, shutting off all of our experiences of the world and so on. I mean, this is, of course, these, now we're getting into sort of more esoteric kinds of practices, but I mean, I think a lot of the Buddha's focus around dukkha, around suffering, involves, of course, suffering is a lot of different things, but at its base, it's a suffering of illness and death, and how our practice allows us to not to cling to life so much that we fear death in the way that we ordinarily do, and not only in ourselves but in others, because I mean, perhaps we fear our own death most, maybe not. It depends on the person, I guess, but
yeah, I think that really depends.
yeah.
Um, and and this again, it's like for me personally, I don't fear death. I may fear the potential causes of that death, and so it's like, oh well, can I how equanimous can I be with that? Right?
The
And of course,
pain, yeah, of pain
you
or
don't know
suffering.
that until it
Mhm.
arises,
Yeah.
and then you find out, and of course, one of the words that's often used to describe nirvana is death, the deathless,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
so it's like, oh, so what's the deathless mean? It means basically that there is no one to die,
Mhm.
and so there's no there is just dying, and in a sense, one transcends death in that sense. Um, what happens next? Well, you'll see.
Yeah,
But
right.
kind of it's there's something about that which is really, also very liberating, obviously. And I mean, I can speak just from the small bit of work I've done in hospice, or even being with students who have died, at the time of death. Um, you can tell if somebody's really trying to hold on, uh, to that last, just I don't want to go. I don't want, it's like, and it's also a matter of like there are those stories of people who will only die after everybody's left the room because they feel like people in the room are holding on. So there's
Interesting.
that kind of letting go as well, and
Mhm.
it's just, I mean, we've jumped way ahead from the person who refused to let go of their seat, as if
It's
but
all the same thing. It's all a
yeah,
continuum.
I mean, it is. It's like,
Yeah.
and uh, yeah, and as some people, some of our listeners know, I'm going to be, my partner and I are going to be leaving our apartment in New York for a while. And even though we're not selling it or anything, we're renting it out. I know that, once we start packing up and once we literally leave the building, it's going to be really hard, right? Because it's a very special place. And it's like, oh, even though there's something new coming along, it's like there's still that letting go. Um, So yeah, it's a big practice. And of course, one of the ways that we can work with that, and I'm holding up this coffee cup here, is like there are some things we have which are really hard to let go of, like a good cup of coffee, and it really kind of supports us.
It does. It does.
It supports this show. So uh, if you want to feed that, I was going to say feed that monster. You can, you can feed our need,
Yep.
our tanha over coffee, our unquenchable thirst.
Thirst for coffee.
You can do that at diggingthedharma.com and buy us
Yep.
a cup of coffee or several, and leave some comments. You can also leave comments here as you're
Yep.
listening. Those who are online now, but that's another example. It's like renunciation is a way of practicing letting go, and like, can we renounce coffee for a day? And I've done it.
Get a headache sometimes, but
Yeah, I've gotten past that, it seems, but
yeah.
I'm because that's I'm just further along the path, Doug. What can
There
I
you
say?
go.
I
You're
don't.
beyond the headaches.
But yeah, so there is something about finding something that you find you're clinging. And this can be just a practice to leave with, right?
Mhm.
What are you really clinging to that you like? What would it be like to let go of something for a day that you've had a hard time doing? So there's this temporary practice of renunciation, right? And of course, when somebody in the early traditions, when somebody becomes a monastic, they're renouncing everything
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
and including in a way their identity. They take a new name, they shave their head. They're letting go of all of their money in a sense, or at least putting it somewhere where. So it's like, what is that like? You know, and it's a place of experimentation.
Yeah.
So,
Even if we don't go that whole way, even just a little
yeah,
bit of,
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and going on retreat is part of that, but
Mhm.
even just doing that for a day, when people let go of their cell phones for a day, it's like they don't want them back, so it's like, there you go.
Yeah.
That's pointing to something right there. Anyway, this is a fun topic, and maybe we'll continue it in the next iteration, the next episode. So thanks for being with us. And
Thank you, John.
yeah, and we will. Somebody just joined, but don't worry, we're going to continue. But for now, we have to close out this segment so we can start a new one. Is that how it's going to? Do we need to
I think so. Yeah. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah. So right now we're going to say thanks for joining us. If you're online, stick around. But thanks for joining us, and keep digging the Dharma. And we will be
Catch you on
back
the
next
next one.
week.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we're going to go right into a new one. Did we think we did? Is there? Can you edit that, Doug?
I can probably edit that.
Okay,
We'll figure something out. Yeah. Yeah. We're good. We're good. Basically, for people who are watching online right now, live, we're going to try to record 2 of these episodes the way we normally do, but you're getting the background stuff. So, we've just done 1, and now we'll move into the second one.
So, Tony, you just joined us as we were talking about letting go.
Yep.
And we may continue evolving that discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. And the question is what we want to talk about next. What is... If our audience has ideas, let us know. Otherwise, we'll try to figure something out.
Well, I mean, I think we can actually continue with
letting go.
With letting go, yeah, and maybe talking more about the second noble truth and that unquenchable thirst. So,
the thirst that doesn't allow us to let things go.
Yeah. So, you guys who are here online live, we are going to do another intro, which will take about 3 seconds, and
I think they understand.
Yeah.
And then I have to edit all these things into actual, like podcast, podcast.
But also if any questions or comments are coming up for you, please put them in, and we can build that into the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you have questions along the way, feel free, or comments, feel free to post them. If we can, we will get to them.
Speaking from your own experience, even.
Letting go of coffee is a tough one. I agree. No one. Yes. Yes.
All right, Doug, I guess it's my turn to welcome you. Okay.
All right. Shall we start?
Yep.
All right.
So greetings, Doug. Good to see you again.
Great. Good to see you as always, John. How are you doing? It's a
I'm
fine day.
I'm as good as I was the last time I greeted you.
There we
So,
go.
so those of you online are getting the background here that know that we, record a few of these at a time, and we have to pretend like we're just greeting each other for the first time.
Yeah.
And in a way, we are greeting each other for the first time. And it's like, oh, as T.S. Eliot wrote in I forget, somewhere in the Four Quartets, he says, realize that every time you meet someone, you're meeting them for the first time because they've changed and you've changed. And,
Very wise.
I am sure, Doug, that in the last 5 minutes, you've changed because, you haven't had your coffee yet or whatever, and my coffee's at the bottom of the cup. So, and I didn't have
Yeah.
time to run down and find it. Anyway, welcome, friends. In our last episode, we were talking about what it means to let go.
Mm.
And how that relates to the second noble truth of tanha,
Thirst.
the
Yeah.
unquenchable thirst,
Mm-hmm.
and how we hold on to basically everything in a sense.
Yeah. And it's unquenchable, and it's interesting to say, yeah, unquenchable thirst. I mean, of course, for the Buddhist path, the third noble truth tells you that I don't know that it's quenchable, but at least it's overcomable, perhaps. But if we overcome it, we don't do so by fulfilling the thirst. It's drinking the water doesn't quench the thirst. It's something else that does that, which is or drinking the coffee is. You can't overcome a thirst for coffee by drinking coffee. That's the point.
Right. Well, that's the nature of addiction, of course, but
Yeah.
we're not addicted to coffee. Well, maybe we are, but
We'll get to that.
that's another
Topic.
Yeah. So, right. So you can't quench the thirst by quenching the thirst.
By fulfilling by ingesting whatever it is that you're thirsty for.
Right. So fulfilling desire does not necessarily get rid of the desire, because another desire will come up, if not for the same thing, if for something else.
Yeah.
And of course, I think we've had this discussion before about whether it's the desire or the clinging to the desire, which is the problem.
Mm.
To me, it's not the desire; it's the clinging
Right.
to the desire, and this quality of clinging to something, clinging to my identity, clinging to my body, clinging to my things, clinging to my partner. First off, my partner is not my partner. My partner is a person, and her own individual. And so what is it like to really, let go in that sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember years ago, I was, years ago, like 20 years ago, I was, uh, I used to teach 1 day a week or 1 hour a week at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. Sorry, Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Yikes.
I don't know. There's one in Boston, is there? Maybe
There is one in
Okay,
Boston,
yeah. Okay.
but I was teaching at the one in New York, which is a huge building in downtown New York. It turned out, and I didn't know this immediately, it other than I think Fort Knox, it's the largest, somewhere in the Federal Reserve Bank is the largest cache of gold.
Way down below everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you can get tours. I never did do that. Anyway, it's besides the point. So I was talking about letting go. And somebody said, well, does that mean like I should maybe assume that at any point my spouse will divorce me or something? And I said, well, no, you could, but it's more about like, how are you, if something happened, how much suffering would result, right? And this is not to be, so let's separate suffering from sadness, right? If we lose a friend, of course, or if we lose a partner for any reason, whether it's we broke up or somebody dies, of course we're going to feel sadness. And sadness is a very human and appropriate emotion. The question is, how much suffering are we experiencing because we're clinging so tightly and refuse to, let this person go? And that brings up the famous story of the mustard seed.
Yeah.
And now I'm expecting you, Doug, to remember the character in the mustard seed because I always forget her name.
Yeah. No, I forget her
The
name.
line knows it. Please tap it in
Yeah,
because
somebody's gonna remember the name, and I'm forgotten it.
senior moments are coming.
Yeah.
And this young woman lost her baby to, this was a long time ago. So people lost children all the time to infant death or whatever. And she went to the Buddha expecting the Buddha could revive her young infant. And she was clinging to the young infant, because she couldn't let this young infant go. And the Buddha said, "Well, I right now I can't revive your young child. I forget the language exactly, but I invite you to do this," which was to go around to every house in the community, in the village, and for every house that that hadn't lost someone, ask them to give you a mustard seed.
And I guess he's gonna make up something with that mustard seed is the
Right.
was the
Right.
implication,
That's right. That he could then, maybe bring this person back to life. And of course, she went to every house, and she didn't find one household that hadn't lost anybody. And she realized how interconnected we all are through this uh, one experience. And she came back and thanked the Buddha. She was able to let go of her child and bury the child, and then she became a monastic. I think she became a nun.
I think she became enlightened eventually.
Yeah, yeah. And so this notion that we're, everything we have will be lost, which is also spoken of in the Buddha's 5 reflections. The fourth reflection being, all that is near and dear to you will vanish.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
Yeah, very difficult for many of us to come to terms with and accept. It's something that we in our last podcast talked about fear. A lot of people, this is like something that is very difficult to hear and raises within us, I think, all fear, deep fear.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's tough to give that up. It's tough to come to that awareness.
And then there's letting go of fear.
Yeah, yeah.
How does one let go of fear?
How do you confront that fear and see it for what it is?
Yeah, and that's actually, that what you're saying just now is so also key to practice, right? It's like we can't let go of something we're not willing to turn toward.
Yeah.
But turning toward that acknowledging that we are holding on to something and it's not helping us.
Yeah.
Right? It's not getting rid. It doesn't get rid of the fear to be fearful of death, or to be fearful of losing a loved one, or to be fearful of, uh, the death of a plant or whatever. It's like, that doesn't get rid of the fear. Right? What can help us loosen the grip of fear is turning toward the fear, and recognizing how, in a way, that fear is gripping you. That fear is holding on to you, right? And so, and then indirectly, you're holding on to it. And so, let me just be with this fear. Where is this fear? What is this fear? How is this fear being experienced? And what happens when I actually turn toward it and allow myself to fully feel it, as opposed to trying to get rid of it? And so there are two, which points to the fact that there are two sides of letting go, right? There is the clinging to, and then there's the pushing away. And in a way, they're both the same, or different sides of the same coin, I suppose we could say, right?
Yeah.
because we know that if we try to push away something, it just sticks that much more. So
Yeah.
it's that much harder to let go of.
Yeah, and then there's all this associated papancha, this sort of mental proliferation, usually when it comes to fear or anxiety around the future. I remember one nun talking about, somebody asked her about what was fear, what was, how do you understand anxiety and fear from a Buddhist perspective? And she said, well, it's just this kind of negative reaction pushing away of the future, this negative reaction towards, and the future, of course, we don't see the future. All that we see is our ideas of the future, our concepts of the future. So the mind uh, produces these conceptualizations of the way the future is going to be, and then we get afraid of them. We don't like them. So it rises. It produces all kinds of dukkha within us.
Yeah, which
And the question is, can we? I mean, there's many ways we can approach this, but one of them is just to be aware of the tenor of our internal chatter that sort of goes on. I know about it when it comes to politics, for instance. What happens if certain things that we don't want to have happen do happen, and fear arises and anxiety arises, and how do we work with that?
yeah,
Because of all this internal chatter of all these, what if this happens and then that happens and then the other thing happens, and it can be tough. It can be tough. But I think you're right that turning towards it is the way to see the way through it.
yeah. I mean, one does. There's the famous acronym for fear, which is false evidence appearing real. I mean, we sort of,
Yeah.
we don't, we hold on to evidence that isn't actually here. Right. So we can make all sorts of assumptions about the future depending on who wins the election or whatever. But until that happens, and even then, we don't really know. And so we can uh, do everything we can to, uh, impact outcome.
Yeah.
But then, another form of letting go is like letting go of the outcome needing to be a particular way.
Yeah.
Right.
The
So,
clinging to the outcome, clinging to
right,
the yeah.
right. Clinging to the result, which we don't have much control over. All we have control over is our own response to whatever is happening, and even that, in one way or another, we don't really have control over. But we, as we said in the last podcast, or I said, we act as though we have control over it, and that's okay, right? So we act as though we have control over our response, and we go with that response because presumably because we've been practicing and we've been taking on a lot of these teachings around ethics and wholesome and unwholesome. Our response is going to naturally be wholesome, hopefully, and then we go with that and respond accordingly. But can we let go of the idea of what the outcome? We don't have to let go of the idea, but just realize it's an idea.
Hmm.
Right? It's not fixed. Um,
Yeah, and I think, I mean, one thing I want to get back to also in this same context, you were talking earlier about the sort of difference between desire on the one hand and clinging or craving on the other. And I think a lot of times I get comments, certainly from people on my videos, sort of mixing the two up and thinking, for example, that Buddhism wants us to get rid of all of our desires or something, and as though such a thing were possible. I mean, the Buddha had desires, and some of our desires are perfectly skillful. There's nothing wrong with wanting a better world, with wanting
right.
to become more wise, or be, whatever, to help people. There's nothing wrong with that. And so it's not the desire itself is the problem. It's that we uh, desire can become too strong, and in becoming too strong, become unskillful or unhealthy for us. I mean, even a healthy desire can become unhealthy if we invest too much into it. And certainly there are desires that are in themselves unhealthy. So we have to, I think, when we're negotiating how we approach practice, I think it's important to understand that we're not saying that you shouldn't have any desires or something like that, but just to be aware of the how a desire manifests itself in both in our feeling, in our body, as you would say, John, as well as in our papancha and the way that our mind spins out. Is a desire causing us to become obsessed by some possibility which we don't know for sure? Then maybe it's not really helping us.
Yeah, I mean, if a desire becomes an obsession, then we're
Yeah.
clinging to a desire, and that's going to create a great deal of suffering.
Yeah.
And there, of course, we have addiction, and there are extremes. And with addiction, of course, there are ways to work with that, and meditation can be helpful in terms of that, and also recognizing it isn't necessarily it certainly isn't a cure-all, but just recognizing the nature of that desire. And I had one of my very, very early, boy, I'm harking back a lot now. I had my first individual um, student. I'd never worked with anybody one-on-one, but this guy made contact, and I thought he sounded interesting. So we worked together, and he told me sort of late in our time together that he had actually quit smoking since we started working. And he told me, yeah, because, he was able to put that space in between the desire and the fulfilling of that desire.
Mm.
And when he added that little bit of space, it was enough for the desire to sort of weaken. And that was all it took for him.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. For others, it takes a lot more, but it is possible. And
I think that's Viktor Frankl. At least people
yeah,
say. I tried to find the quote from him, but it seems like it's at least there's nowhere that people can
attributed
find.
to him.
Yeah, attributed to Viktor Frankl that there's this space between stimulus and response,
Right.
and in that space is our freedom, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we have a stimulus, but do we respond automatically, or do we give that tiny bit of space where we can think over whether the response that's ordinarily automatic is really the best response, or whether we should think of something else.
And one could also put this in karmic terms, right? So if we if we believe that every action is creating a karmic seed or has a karmic response, right? So when a karmic seed comes to some level of fruition, that is, when it arises in the mind to act a particular way, if that karmic seed is a result of unwholesome action, then the karmic seed itself is going to be potentially moving us into an unwholesome action. It's that moment that allows us to kind of say, no, thank you, and let it go. And then the karmic seed is taken care of. If it's, a karmic seed that would lead us into wholesome action, then we act accordingly. And we've created another wholesome karmic seed, I guess we could say. So that's another way of kind of modeling it. And it's really interesting. So when we notice an impulse arising in the mind, how often are we able to give space between the impulse and the action? And that's really refined practice, of course, because it's so quick usually.
Yeah.
And if we're able to and this is also the beauty of formal practice, because we can, and just as an example, friends, we sit there and an itch arises, And of course, the immediate impulse is to scratch the itch. And I'm not saying the itch is arising from a karmic consequence, although it could be. Um, but the itch arises, and rather than scratching the itch, we wait, or we give some space and see what happens. And there'll be like, if it's a really bad itch, we may break into a cold sweat or whatever. But usually, what happens is it changes, right? And that reaction, that automatic reaction, that auto response, also changes. And so that's just a little place of practice, but a lot can be learned from that one experience.
Yeah. And it's also the sort of, I think, in formal practice, this sort of way that you learn, and it's a slow learning, but to slow things down, because part of, I think, the issue with the stimulus and response is that it's, as I say, it's just so quick that we don't see it. It's over before we even are able to be mindful, and that the practice of mindfulness, as we're able to take it into our life, is one of slowing things down a little bit, which
Yeah.
gives us that space.
Yeah. And people report that. It's like, oh, things
Yeah.
have seemed, there are two things that people report after they've, done some training to kind of recultivate this quality is things seem to go slower.
Yeah.
And they realize options are present, whereas before they weren't cognizant of that.
Yeah.
So, and that cognition, a word I'm hesitant to use, but that recognition anyway, right, is what actually helps in terms of letting go, and so, we can experience this feeling of either clinging to or really wanting to get rid of. And we know that feeling. And in the knowing of that feeling, we can say, well, wait, let me just wait. Let me see what happens to that feeling before I act on it. And that turns things around in that moment. It opens up options that we hadn't necessarily paid attention to before. So, so friends, we still haven't let go of coffee, but it's okay. Eventually, that'll happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
It's, we talked about the addiction before, but it's a minor addiction, shall we say?
I would say so. And there's still debate as to whether how much coffee is good for you and how much isn't. It's like every time the one story comes, another story happens to contradict it, and
I can highlight. Let me highlight this comment here that no one says letting go of coffee is a tough one.
yes.
So,
Thank
and
you.
I think we can all agree with that.
So along those lines, if you'd like to support the show, please go to our website. Ooh, we should put that in the banner. diggingthedharma.com. I don't know if you can do that.
Diggingthedharma.com. I should make a
I mean,
banner.
we are, here, and there you can actually buy us coffee, at least in a kind of indirect way. diggingthedharma.com. Yeah. And let us know that you liked the show. Or
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. We're doing a new format here. So if you're listening in the podcast, we also have we're doing a live stream broadcast as we record the podcast, so we can get at least potentially comments and questions from anybody who's sticking around to listen to us live. Otherwise, just listen on the podcast. We will definitely be continuing to put them out as podcasts as well, so you have your option.
Yeah, and you can watch it, and we will also post the YouTube link.
It'll be out. So live
once if you really want to watch us give the podcast, you're welcome to do that. And we will also post in advance when we are podcasting that week, because it's hard to be consistent. We do our best, but sometimes schedules just don't work that way.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. Keep digging the Dharma, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Great to see everybody.
Take care.
All right. Let's see. Oh, we have another comment. Let me just show the comment. Thank you. Thank you, but no, thank you very much. No one.
Not sure I'd
Very
call it a
good.
Dharma talk. It was a Dharma discussion, though, and we'll take that.
Well, yeah, that's good
Yeah,
enough.
fun. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
All right, friends.
All right, we will
Signing off.
we will sign off now, and yeah, see you probably in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll
Take
be
care.
recording the next one in a couple weeks.